Hello everybody. I don't know if this is live, if you can hear me. Let's see what's going on. Hello everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm not the most technical of people, so hopefully... Hello everybody. Is there anybody there? Can somebody maybe type a message? See if you can hear me at all. Right, I'm not the most technical of people, so if you can hear me, that's fine. Don't know what's going on. Hello everybody, sorry about that. I think I'm live now, hope so anyway, and I can't see how many people are watching. I'm not the most technical person in the world. Hopefully if somebody is there you can have a chat and say something. What I'm going to do is just carry on with a discussion about intonation and language learning. So if there is somebody there, then you can maybe interact. If not, I'll just start speaking and start a kind of presentation until someone's ready to say something, and then we can have a discussion about it. So I want to cover a few different things about intonation. So first of all, I want to say what intonation is, definition of intonation. After that, I want to explain that every language has its own intonation. So you probably know all these things anyway, but I want to give some examples. And this is all to do with intonation awareness and language learning, which I think is very important when you learn a language, because it's not often covered in the curriculum. When you learn a language, you often learn about pronunciation, about practicing speaking and reading and writing and listening. So intonation is a big part of language learning, but it's something that's very difficult to explain in a sort of concrete way. So that's another thing I want to talk about, the difference between languages and intonation. I want to try and draw some analogy between music and language and intonations. So I want to be able to give a musical example and then try to say how the language will, let me try to explain that another way. I want to give a musical example of a kind of intonation in music, and I want to relate it to language learning, and then go back and see how you can relate that to language learning. So anyway, it'll become clearer in the example I use later. And finally, I want to just have a discussion about, is it actually really important to know about intonation and language? And how can you develop your intonation awareness? So I want to talk about active and passive learning as well. So active learning is when you're learning, a structured course, you're actively doing grammar exercises, this kind of thing. And I think passive learning could be an important way to develop your intonation awareness. Okay, so going back to the first thing I said, I want to define what intonation is. So intonation, if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see various interpretations for intonation, but generally intonation is the rising and falling or variation of tones or pitch, if you like, in a person's voice, in a phrase of a language. So we're not talking about words here. Words tend to be pronunciation, so how you pronounce a word, but this is to do with the pattern and the long sentences that you have in languages. So you have different pitch, you have rhythm in language. So some languages will sound different and have different rhythms, and different statements will have different rhythms. Intonation can also be the volume. So you can speak really loudly, or you can whisper and just say something very gently. It can be the speed that you speak as well, so you can speak really quickly, or you could really languorously take a long time and describe some words in a kind of very velvety way. And so all these factors add up to the intonation of a language and a person's intonation. So intonation is also a very personal thing. Everybody has a different intonation. And you could even say different accents within different languages have different intonations as well. So in the UK, we have a good example of, say, for example, a Birmingham accent will be very up and down. So if you're speaking from Birmingham, you're speaking like this. And sorry, that was a very bad smack me on the face. That's it. Won't do that again. But there, different regional accents can have hugely different intonations. So different languages, I said, have different intonations. So for example, for me, two very related languages, say for example, Italian and French, sound very, very different to each other. So in Italian, to me, it sounds very sing-song, and the rhythms in Italian are very distinctive. I can hear, so for example, a phrase like questo tipo di pasta ha fatto tutta a mano. So it's like it's very distinct and quite it can be quite a sing-song language. So the pitch or the tone of voice can go up and down quite a bit within sentences. The words in Italian are intoned in a very systematic way. So I think when I was learning Italian, I learned that stress is another factor of intonation as well, apart from pitch, volume, rhythm, timbre, voice, and all these different things. So the stress of a word or the stress of a syllable can be is usually placed in the same place in Italian. So, for example, it's usually the third or the second syllable from the end of the word. So, like Tarantini, Tarantini. I probably got that wrong, actually. Someone's going to correct me on this. But I know it's very systematic and has a pattern to it, which is quite sort of, I won't say fixed, but quite formulaic. So you always know when you're listening to Italian. Whereas English, for example, there are so many different dialects, and not dialects, but accents. So the American accent will emphasize different parts of the sentence. So different languages have different intonation, and sometimes this can get you into trouble. So, for example, in Hungarian, for example, the emphasis tends to be on the beginning of the sentence. So let me think of a sentence. So if I wanted to say, could I speak to Dora, please? If I was ringing somebody up, I'd say, Os Dora van Saratnik Bazelny. Saratnik, I think that's right. As Dora van Saratnik Bazelny. So, as Dora van Saratnik Bazelny, the emphasis tends to go on the beginning of the sentence, and we don't often have that in English. You know, we wouldn't say, can I speak to Dora? Or, can I speak to Dora, please? Whereas in Hungarian, I've noticed that the intonation tends to have a lot of stress at the beginning of the sentence. In English, it doesn't. So, sometimes it sounds a bit strange when you're speaking to a Hungarian person and their intonation is a bit different to yours. So they haven't actually mastered the English intonation because their language is so different in terms of intonation. So if that makes sense, that could get you into trouble. If you're saying a sentence, it could sound a bit rude in the other language, maybe, or a bit assertive. So I really like the Hungarian accent because I think Hungarian people speak English very clearly, and that's because, you know, their language is similar to Italian for me. It does sound the words are very clearly marked out, and whereas in, say, Spanish, for example, the words all seem to run together for me, and in French as well. So, like, for example, in French, the sentence "Est-ce que je me repose" has about 8 words in it. So, est-ce que je me repose? Est-ce que je me repose? So it's all like, the intonation is all on one flat level. I'm not saying French is all flat like that, because obviously each language has different intonation according to what mood you're creating. So the most commonly spoken about thing in language learning with intonation is when you're changing a statement to a question. So many languages will end up with something being raised in the sentence when asking a question. So in English, for example, I might say, you're going to the shops. So the statement, you're going to the shops, is a sort of falling kind of intonation. But if I wanted to ask someone, I mean, in English, we would say, are you going to the shops? So we have those question words that we use. But supposing I wanted to say, you're going to the shops and turn it into a question, I would say, you're going to the shops. So you can see straight away the intonation changes. You're going to the shops. And if I was in Australia, I'd probably go, you're going to the shops? And I'd go really high. I did tell myself I wouldn't do any accents. So that's the last one, okay. Right, so with questions, in some languages, there might be a different part of the sentence that goes up. So French and English vary very slightly in terms of questioning intonation. So in French, you might say, tu vas au magasin? Tu vas au magasin? Tu vas au magasin? So it's a bit slightly more sing-song than in English. You going to the shops? Actually, perhaps it's quite similar, isn't it, really? It's a subtle difference. Let's talk about Polish. Since I can't see any questions from anybody, I don't know how many people are on live. I'm not very technical, sorry. I might only have like 0 people or no people or 1 person. If there are people out there, hello everybody. And you can always watch this later. You know, I might be watching it later myself and having a laugh. So Polish, for example, when you ask someone a question and they answer in the negative, they will answer, yeah. Yeah, so the voice is really high and it drops down quite a bit. And to me, when it transcribes back into English, if a Polish person is speaking English and you ask them something, they say, "Oh, hi, April. Somebody's there. Hello, April. Good to see you." In Polish, it will, you know, they might answer in English, "No," like that. And I think sometimes that can sound a bit strange to an English person if they don't know, if they're not familiar with the Polish intonation. So, my point is that I think to be aware of different intonations in language can break down a barrier between when someone speaks your native language back to you and then, you know, they're not native. It can, you know, give you a different kind of perspective on what they, you know, why they're speaking like that. So I hope that makes sense. So do you think intonation awareness is important in language learning? Well, I think that the difference between active and passive learning, so in active learning, you're actively going to look at grammar books, you're doing a lesson, you're having a lesson with the teacher, you're doing exercises, you're actively listening to something. Whereas passive learning, which there's a bit of a debate about, I know I've seen quite a few videos on YouTube about this, that passive learning doesn't really work for language learning. But I think in the case of familiarizing yourself with the sound of a language, the intuitive sound of a language, which you can't really teach somebody intonation, you can only absorb how it feels for that language, if that makes sense. So I think that a certain amount of passive language learning, so in other words, just listening to something in the background, maybe absorbing yourself with watching YouTube videos in the background, listening to news channels, music, that kind of thing, will help you to get an intuitive feel for the intonation of that language, if that makes sense. So I'm a believer in passive language learning as well as active language learning to help you develop. And I think this helps you develop your accent, because somewhere you'll be absorbing those patterns and those rhythms and the tones in your mind, and whether it's a subconscious thing or, you know, unconscious thing, and I think it will help you to reproduce. So this leads me on to my next question: is language learning is sort of music? No, let me start again. Is is it only musicians or people who have a good ear that can be aware of the intonation of languages? So April said that's something I'm doing at the moment. So April, do you mean you're sort of doing a lot of passive listening as well as active listening? If that's what I think you mean, yeah. I think it's important to do a bit of each, because when you're just doing active language learning all the time, you reach a stage where I think you become a bit sort of overwhelmed by the sort of pressure to keep up those things, and you need a bit of a break from it as well. And I think, in a way, passive language learning is a bit of a stepping back and listening to stuff in the background. I think I do a lot of that myself as well. In the beginning of learning a language, I like to do a lot more listening than, I mean, I do the active stuff as well, but I tend to just immerse myself in the sounds of a language to get to feel, exactly what it's like. April, do you think that it helps, you being a musical person, I know you are, to have a good ear for music helps with, intonation in the language? I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and play you a bit of music, and I'm going to play it in a couple of different ways, and I'm going to try and relate this back to language and see if I can sell you the idea of listening out for intonation. Okay, right, here we go. Right, I don't know if I can remember this off by heart. It's I'm going to play my recorder, and I don't know how this is going to sound with my microphone. It might be a bit dodgy. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to play a phrase of music, and I'm going to play it with intonation, and then I'm going to play it without any intonation, and then I'm going to have a discussion about it. So here we are. Whoops, I did some bum notes there. I'm going to have to get my music out to read it. Sorry. I thought I could remember it. Right, here we go. And now I'm going to play it without any intonation. So just like reading it from the music. Complete with bum notes as well. So you probably noticed that the first one was a bit more stylish, hopefully, and the second one was a bit flat. So my analogy with this is that the first one is like a person speaking, so it has all the different nuances and slight changes in volume and texture that a person's voice would have, whereas the second piece was a bit like a Google Translate robot or a bot or something, trying to speak the language. So because of that, I think that's a way to kind of try to explain, how can I say, intonation on an intuitive sort of level. Intonation varies from person to person, language to language, from our dialects to dialect, accent to accent. But being able to listen to something and absorb it, I think is good. So I don't know what else to say. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I don't know how many people are online. Is it just you, April? Is it just you and I? Should we play some duets? I don't know. April plays the recorder as well, by the way. Let's see what else. I just wanted to go back and say about when I was saying about comparing languages and getting into trouble. I recently learnt some Akan Twi, which is a language from Ghana, and it surprised me that when I learnt how to ask a question in Twi, you actually drop down at the sentence. So, like, I'm going to give you an example. So, I'm going to say I speak English in Twi, which is miti brofo, miti brofo. But if I ask you, do you speak English? I would say wati brofo, like that at the end. So the intonation goes down in asking a question. So when you speak to somebody from Ghana or one of those countries that have the Niger Congo type languages, the questions drop down. So when they speak English, sometimes they might ask you, what's your brother's name? Like that. So you might not respond because you might think it's not a question. You might think it's a statement, your brother's name. So another kind of awareness to, intonation. I've been told that musicians' voices are more interesting. Hope so. I've been told my voice is quite boring, actually. I think I do ramble on a bit, and I do probably speak a bit too quickly. Don't know about that one. I know your voice is very interesting, April, and quite a few of my musical colleague voices. Yep. So, let me just have a look at my notes. What have I put here? Each language is different. I was going to try and draw a musical analogy again of this is something you could practice with intonation and language learning. So a way to practice the recorder is, supposing I was doing that phrase again, I'll just do a little bit of it. Rather than play the actual notes, you can turn the recorder around and just play so it'll give you the same notes, same pitch each time. So I'll go like that. This is a good way to practice musical, the timbre of your music, the phrasing. So if you want to do like staccato notes like these, da, 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 you can, and rather than have the notes in the phrase as well, you can just play the phrase all on one level, all on one pitch. So with that in mind, so I played this phrase, and then I'm going to play it with the same pitch. If I want to practice my musical intonation on this, I would be going like this. So you could do the same with language. So rather than worry about the actual words of a phrase of a language, you could be practicing the rhythm of the language. So let me explain. I do a lot of listening with Pimsleur CDs. So Pimsleur method is something where you just keep listening to a lesson and you don't worry about the grammar or writing of the language in the first instance. So I learnt a Chinese phrase, for example, which is 我的左比比我的右比长, which is a comparative statement. So in Chinese, that means my left arm is longer than my right arm. Yes, that's what it means. I probably pronounced it incorrectly, but I noticed that all those comparative statements have that same kind of rhythm. So it's like da 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 da. So let me think of another one. Same one in Chinese. So if I said my cat is cuter than my dog. So 我的猫比我的猫比我的狗很可爱. So 我的猫比 okay, so it's similar. It's a similar rhythm again. So da 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 da. There seems to be a little pause after the bi, which is the comparative word. So just to know that kind of phrasing, which is intonation, will help when you come to do another one, and learn another comparative sentence. So this is my kind of method for learning intonation in language. I often try to think in the musical terms of the language. So I did it with Polish as well. When I was learning the tongue twister, which is książ brzmi w tcinicie. It's like and sometimes I find Polish sentences go like this as well. Perhaps it's just me then, April says here. You mean just you on the live studio? Probably. I don't know where I see the numbers or anything. You said at the beginning that intonation is important, but do you think it's important right from the start of learning a language? Yes, I think it's important to have a feel. I don't necessarily think it's important to worry about intonation, because it's something that you can't really learn from the beginning. It's something that you develop a feel for, because it's a sort of intuitive thing rather than a conscious thing. But I still think it's important to know about intonation, and this comes with, or let's say, I think it's important to have an awareness of intonation in language, because it will help you with pronouncing and with the verbal side of language, I think, and maybe with the listening side as well, because sometimes if you're listening to a language and you don't quite know if a person's asking a question or doing a statement, it will be important. This happened to me in Kurdish when I was learning Kurdish. So a few months ago, actually it's nearly a year ago now, I started learning Kurdish, and I've put that on the back burner for a minute because I haven't really made much progress with Kurdish. But a while ago I was listening, this was during lockdown when I had a lot of time, I was listening to lots of Kurdish news channels and videos, and even though I didn't feel like I was learning much of the vocabulary, the content of the language, something happened to me. I went to a shop and I was speaking to, there are 4 Kurdish guys working in the shop near to me, and I was speaking to them in Kurdish. I had a 5-minute conversation in Kurdish, and one of them asked me something, and I don't exactly know what it was he asked me, but I answered with a question, and it was a sort of intuitive process that I was sort of going through, and I realised I was listening to the intonation of his voice as well as the words he was saying, but I missed quite a few words, but I got the meaning of what he was saying through the intonation, if that makes sense. So I think intonation isn't something you need to worry about, and it's not something you need to necessarily focus on in the beginning of language learning, but I think it's something that helps with developing an ear for language. Does that make sense? Hope so. Okay, so I don't know how much longer I can talk about intonation for. Let me have another look at my notes. I think I covered all the aspects of intonation in the definition. April says, I've been learning Italian for more than a year and I've only just started paying attention to intonation. I'm doing a fair bit of reading aloud and I can hear that my voice is too flat. Yeah, because Italian is very sort of sing-song, isn't it? And it's something that's probably not natural for us Brits to learn. It's, you know, 33, Tarantino, introdono in tutta 33. It's sort of very much more of a sort of tonal language. I know it's not a tonal language, but it's got much more tonal distinctiveness to me. Is that how to describe Italian? I'm not sure, but 33 Tarentini entrarono. It's very I always find Italian a bit very staccato. If you're comparing it to music, you know, staccato is like da 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 da. But of course, it's the language of opera as well. So there's lots of, you know, it's a very wavy language. I agree. Yeah, it does go up and down quite a lot. I think personally, I've become a lot more aware of intonation in languages since I started learning Chinese, actually, because Chinese is a tonal language, but there's a big distinction between tonal languages and intonation, of course. So Chinese has 4 tones. So you have a high tone, a falling tone, a falling rising tone, and a rising tone. And there's also another tone which is like a clipped sort of neutral tone, they call it. So in Chinese, for example, let's think of something to say. So I would say, I'm trying to think of something funny to say in Chinese. Let's just say the numbers, like E. So E is a high level tone. That's number 1. E, and then R. R is a falling tone. And then the next change is 5, which is a falling rising tone. So wo, wo. It's actually wo, not war, because war is I. Wo. And then liu. I'm trying to think of a tone that goes up for numbers. There isn't one. So let's think of something that goes up. Mai. 我买了. So I bought it. Mai. So you have to be very careful between mai and mai. So mai is to buy something, and mai is to sell something. So I was trying to explain to my Chinese volunteer in the shop where I work that 我卖了, I sold it. Rather than, and she said, "What did you buy?" She's thinking that I'd pronounced it wrong, assuming that 我买了. So it's quite difficult. But I've noticed in Chinese that even though it's a tonal language, so all those different words, which are syllables, basically have different falling, rising, and they're all connected along in a sentence. There is still intonation within the language. So, for example, the word for really in Chinese is gender. So if I was going to say really, which obviously in English, the intonation for that word changes, and it can change quite a lot. So you could say really, you know, really surprised, and you can go up, or you go really, like a bit sarcastically, or really, you know, when you're using it as an adjective, to say this is really, really good, or is it an adverb? Adverb, adjective, not sure. So in Chinese, the word for really, gender. So if you're saying like really, gender, but you can say this is really good, you know, 它是真的好, or gender, you can make your voice go quite high. So the tones are quite flexible in Chinese language as well. Well, I should say the intonation is flexible. The tones are fixed. Hope that makes sense. So, anything else to say about intonation? Don't know, really. I haven't really got any more notes. So, I think I'll probably call it a day there, unless anyone has anything else to say. And April, was it just you here today? I don't know. thank you very much for coming. Anyway, I really appreciate you watching. If it's just you, without you, I would just be talking to myself and would have no friends, no Billy, no mates thing. Very strange feeling doing a live streamline. It's different to making a video, because obviously in a video you can cut and you can have a kind of script or some program that you're going to say. So it's a bit scary actually. So thank you very much, April. And your questions have been very interesting as well. And good luck with your Italian learning. Thank you very much for being my #1 supporter on my channel. And I'm just going to give a couple of shouts to two other people who do support my channel, but I know they won't be able to watch at the moment because they're in Brazil and the USA, and that's SK Languages and Professor X. You are two of my other supporters. So I've got 700 and odd subscribers now. So if you're watching this video afterwards, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. And I'll just sign out now. So this is goodbye from the Andy and April show. And April, thank you very much for watching. And see you soon. Bye, everybody.